Good evening, class. Today we're talking about a very serious topic, a matter of life and death, in fact. Today's topic is consumerism and the environment. Now, we looked at this economic theory of consumerism that believes that the more we consume, the better off we all will be. The more jobs we have, the more money we'll all have, the more goods and services that we can all enjoy. Everyone wins, right? But what if that's wrong? What if there's a limit to this beautiful theory of consumerism that gave us all kinds of wonderful things like bunny mouse pads or pens where you can write as much as your heart desires? What could go wrong with that? Well, we're going to see the effect that consumerism can have on the environment and what our society has done to mitigate that effect, to make it not so bad. Now, the textbook, if you ever look into the textbook, I don't know why you would, but they've got some good examples there. They talk about pen production, and they look at all the different factors involved in pens. So they look at the chemical production of the ink. They look at the plastic elements and how it requires petroleum extraction, all the carbon emissions, all the toxins created from that. They look at the metal components and the mining that needs to be done, disturbing the soil, possible water contamination, all just for this little pen. Is that worth it for destroyed ecosystems, for destroyed livelihoods? Well, you know what? I can draw a pretty cool picture of a smiley face. So I would argue yes. You might argue no. But in any case, we want to make sure that we are looking after our environment, certainly to a degree. This is why we have different environmental regulations. For example, there are laws about labels on electrical appliances and how energy efficient they are. They have to pass certain standards. When we look at vehicles, vehicles have to pass certain emission standards in addition to all the safety things we discussed. In fact, a few years ago, Volkswagen got in quite a bit of trouble because they actually lied. They actually cheated on an emissions test by basically putting a device in to fool the emission readers. So their vehicles were actually producing several times more emissions than had initially been detected. So they had to pay actually several $billion of fines to various countries for violating these laws, as well as disgrace their name. Another automaker that's not quite so squeaky clean right there. There are other cases about environmental laws coming into effect, and one of the ones that I'm most excited about is leaded gasoline. That's right. So lead was actually used as an anti-knocking agent in gasoline. So knocking is basically when you're igniting the engine, when the engine is going through the ignition process, before it gets that hot flame, you can get kind of a cooler flame, which will cause many little explosions or knocking sounds in the engine. So this can either be a minor annoyance, just like a little pinging sound, or it can be, it's an explosion. It could potentially be destructive to your engine. So basically lead, it bonds with some of these cooler fires to prevent those little mini explosions from happening. But as you might know, perhaps you've talked in science class, looking at the periodic table of the elements, that lead is a deadly neurotoxin. It can basically cause brain and nervous system failure. And so by the time this was really like the 1920s, when lead additives were becoming really popular to gasoline, as the auto industry was growing, at this time, people already knew that lead was dangerous. They had documented cases, but the people who were producing it argued that, okay, in the gasoline, it won't be okay. It's not like you're drinking it, it's not like you're eating it. But as we found out from the emissions, it turned out to be incredibly harmful. There were factory workers who were working with this leaded gasoline who were dying by the droves. They also had massively increased levels of air and soil pollution with lead. And they actually discovered there was a scientist who was not even focusing on the leaded gasoline, but he was trying to study the age of the Earth. And using lead, basically, if you look at carbon dating and some of those elements you look at in grade 7 science, he was trying to detect the levels of lead, but they were way thrown off by the amount of lead in the atmosphere, in the environment and the soil. So he had to isolate that those samples of rocks and fossils, he had to isolate them from where they were being exposed to that pollution. And so it showed just how much the emissions from vehicles, it wasn't just magically disappearing, it was getting it all into the environment. So basically by the 1970s, throughout the world, a major push was made to ban leaded gasoline. In Canada, it was 1993 when it was fully banned. I still remember I was 4 years old, and I was really excited to just go and drink some leaded gasoline. And my parents said, "Sorry, Kurt, you can't drink leaded gasoline. It's against the law." And it completely spoiled my birthday that year, but it was okay. I still had trans fats. So leaded gasoline is still legal. I looked up the latest information because in the PowerPoint that I have, it says that there are 6 countries as of 2011 where it was still legal. Now, some of them have been phasing it out. So actually, the status of these they're developing countries, as you might guess, how successful they've been in phasing them out is a matter for debate. But I believe it was Algeria, Afghanistan, Myanmar, North Korea, Iraq, and Yemen. So not exactly your number one destination vacations destinations, but yeah, they recognize, despite their spotty human rights records, that leaded gasoline is not so good for you. So that's an example there about recognizing the danger and legislating that we need to put human safety above perhaps the economical advantage of having lead in gasoline. And since then, so by like the 30s and 40s, they already had alternatives that did not have lead that people could use in gasoline. Okay, so I hope you found that to be a very enlightening experience. But one thing about the word lead, just before we continue on to our next little bit about consumer health and safety, is people often misspell. They often misspell that word lead. So particularly, we talk about lead, the element that killed all those people in with the gasoline. We also talk about, he led his team to victory. So one thing is that people need to know that when you have the past tense of the word lead, it's just L-E-D. It's L-E-D. If you have lead here, you either pronounce it lead, like I'm going to lead them to victory, or the element is lead. But if you're talking about someone who's showing leadership and they did it in the past, it is lead. So keep that in mind. So I see that a lot, and a lot of really good writers actually make that mistake. So don't fall victim. Okay, so there are many, many other cases of consumerism and the environment. I just want to show you something that you may not realize this, but this entire presentation, I have been in mortal danger. You see, I have this hole puncher that is right next to me. You might think, well, gee, your fingers don't fit in the hole punch. You're not at risk, but actually I am, because this hole puncher contains lead. It actually came with a warning label that said, in the state of California, this has been proven to have birth defects. So, God forbid I take this hole puncher to California. It would be disastrous. So something like that, you want to make sure, don't be sleeping next to your hole puncher. Don't be spending a lot of time next to it. Make sure you read the labels on hole punchers, because yeah, just touching it right there is probably not going to kill me. But if I'm just always taking it around with me like a hole puncher companion, it could have severe deleterious effects on my health and the health of my future offspring. So be careful with those hole punchers. Moving on into our lesson, if you're taking a look at PowerPoint 7.4, you'll notice a number of political cartoons. Now, some of them are a little bit dated, like one of them actually refers to the Rachel Notley government, which is why the guy's got an orange shirt on. So you might notice the symbolism there. But when next we're in class together, we're going to go over these cartoons together, see if you can interpret them, but then we get to the fun part. You're going to get to design your own political cartoon. And the beautiful thing I find is that a lot of people are better actually at designing them than they are interpreting them. The thing to be mindful of, though, is you may want to search other cartoons up for inspiration, and that's okay, but I would advise strongly against searching one up in the topic for which you want to write. Because I've seen actually some really good students, even when I've warned them as such, who've copied political cartoons from the internet, and I've had to give them a 0. despite them having that warning. So as far as what topic, you don't have to do it about the environment. It's just that the cartoons we're showing, a lot of them relate to environmental issues. You can do any kind of topic. You can do something political. You can also do something societal that's not overtly political. Like, for example, I've had students in the past who've talked about double standards. They've talked about body shaming, and they've talked about how as girls, they feel that there's a lot more pressure on them to look a certain way than do the gentlemen. So really any topic that speaks to you. You can poke fun at a lot of topics. And in these modern days, it seems that political cartoons often are very sarcastic and mocking. If you saw some political cartoons in grade 7 from like the 1800s, you get a lot more that actually are praising their topic. But it's completely up to you what you want your topic to be. You want to make sure that the messaging is very clear. So using irony makes it really a lot of fun, a lot of humor and sarcasm, but you do want to make sure your message is not lost. You don't have to be a great artist either. For example, if you wanted to feature our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, but you're not very good at drawing likenesses, you can just label their clothes Prime Minister or Trudeau or whatever, because that is completely fine. But some political cartoonists in real life, in the media, are better artists than others. And this is not an art class. Okay, so I hope you're excited to start a political cartoon. I hope you're excited to stay away from lead-filled hole punchers, but I wish you a happy, safe, and environmentally sustainable day. Bye-bye. Forever. No, not really forever.